Welcome to Office Revenge Hub. Sit back and enjoy today's story.
They laughed at me in that conference room, dismissed my ideas like I was nothing, treated me like I didn't belong at the table. But 6 months later, they weren't laughing anymore. They were begging me to come back. My name is Adrienne Cole, and for 3 years I was a business development manager at Summit Consulting Group, a management consulting firm in Seattle. We specialized in helping mid-sized companies optimize their operations, streamline processes, and scale sustainably. It was prestigious work, the kind of place where Harvard MBAs competed for entry-level positions. I didn't have an MBA from Harvard. I had a state school business degree and 5 years of grinding experience at smaller firms before Summit took a chance on me. I got in because I'd built a track record of actually delivering results, not just impressive PowerPoint decks. I'd helped a manufacturing client increase efficiency by 40%. I'd guided a retail chain through a successful expansion into 3 new markets. I had real-world wins, not just theoretical frameworks. Summit was different from anywhere I'd worked before. The culture was intensely competitive. Everyone was smart, polished, articulate. Partners drove luxury cars and talked about their vacation homes. Junior consultants worked 100-hour weeks, hoping to make it to the next level. It was prestigious, exhausting, and cutthroat. But I loved the work. I loved solving complex business problems. I loved the moment when you could see a strategy click into place and transform a struggling company. That's what kept me going through the long hours and the politics. My boss was a senior partner named Richard Thornton. Late 40s, impeccably dressed, incredibly intelligent. He'd built his reputation on turnaround strategies, coming into failing companies and restructuring them back to profitability. He was respected, feared, and extremely demanding. Richard had hired me personally. He'd seen my work at my previous firm and recruited me to Summit. I need people who can think beyond the textbook, he'd told me during the interview. People who understand that business is messy and real, not some case study from business school. For the first 2 years, our relationship was solid. He gave me challenging projects. I delivered strong results. I brought in 3 new clients through referrals from satisfied previous clients. My performance reviews were excellent. I thought I was on track for promotion to senior manager. Then Summit merged with another consulting firm, Apex Strategy Partners. It was sold as a merger of equals, but really it was an acquisition. Apex was larger, better funded, and more aggressive. Their people started filling key positions. The culture shifted almost immediately. Suddenly the emphasis was less on actual results and more on perception, on prestigious client names, on the size of contracts, not the quality of outcomes. Apex had a particular style, very corporate, very slick. Everything was about the pitch, the presentation, the performance. Richard adapted. He had to. The new managing partner was from Apex, a man named Douglas Hendricks, who'd made his name landing enormous contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Douglas valued what he called executive presence, the ability to command a room, to speak the language of C-suite executives, to look and sound the part. I was good at my job, but I didn't have that polished Apex style. I was direct, practical, focused on substance over style. That had always worked for me before. Now it was becoming a liability. The turning point came during a new business pitch meeting 6 months after the merger. We were competing for a major contract with Pinnacle Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate looking to restructure their supply chain. The contract was worth $3 million over 2 years. Landing it would be a huge win. Richard assembled a pitch team. Himself as lead partner, 2 senior managers from the Apex side, and me. I'd done extensive research on Pinnacle's operations, and I identified specific inefficiencies, developed concrete recommendations. I knew this pitch inside and out. The meeting was at Pinnacle's headquarters, a gleaming office tower downtown. Their VP of Operations and CFO would be in the room. These were serious decision makers with the authority to award the contract. We gathered in Summit's conference room an hour before the meeting to do a final run-through. Richard, the two Apex senior managers, Harrison and Elise, and me. We reviewed the presentation deck, discussed who would cover which sections. Adrian, you'll handle the operational analysis slides, Richard said. Walk them through the specific inefficiencies you've identified and your proposed solutions. I nodded. This was my strength. I'd prepared thoroughly. Harrison, one of the Apex managers, spoke up. "Ma, are we sure that's the right approach? Getting too detailed in the operational weeds might lose them. These are executives. They want big picture vision." "The big picture is important," I said, but Pinnacle specifically asked for concrete analysis of their supply chain issues. They want to know we understand the specifics of their problems. "I'm just saying," Harrison continued, "there's a reason Apex has a 92% close rate on pitches. We know how to speak to executive level concerns. Too much technical detail can make us look like order takers instead of strategic partners." I felt my jaw tighten but stayed quiet. Richard was watching the exchange. We arrived at Pinnacle's office. The conference room was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive table, expensive leather chairs. The VP of Operations, Michael Reeves, and CFO Sandra Park greeted us professionally. Richard opened the pitch, smooth, confident, establishing credibility. Then Elise presented our high-level approach, lots of strategy frameworks and consulting terminology. Harrison discussed our track record and case studies. Then it was my turn. The operational analysis, the substance behind all the strategic language. I pulled up my slides showing Pinnacle's current supply chain structure. Based on our analysis of your operations data, we've identified 3 critical bottlenecks that are costing you approximately $8 million annually in inefficiency. I walked through the first bottleneck, showed the data, explained the specific problem. Michael Reeves leaned forward, clearly engaged. This was exactly the kind of detail he wanted. Then Harrison interrupted. What Adrian is highlighting here ties into our broader strategic framework for operational excellence. We've seen similar patterns across multiple industries. He effectively talked over me, redirecting the conversation to vague strategic concepts instead of the specific problems I was presenting. I tried to bring it back to the concrete analysis. The data specifically shows that your distribution center in Tacoma is creating a 22% delay in shipments to your Northwest region, which, right, Harrison cut in again, and that's symptomatic of the kind of systemic inefficiency that requires a holistic restructuring approach. Michael, Sandra, what we're really talking about here is transforming your entire supply chain paradigm. I saw Richard's expression. He wasn't stopping Harrison. He was nodding along. I powered through the rest of my section, but Harrison kept interjecting, reframing my specific recommendations as general strategic concepts. By the time I finished, my carefully researched analysis had been diluted into consulting word salad. The meeting ended cordially. We shook hands. They said they'd be in touch. Back in the car, I thought we'd address what had just happened. Harrison had undermined my entire presentation. Instead, Richard said, "Good work, everyone. I think that went well." I felt like my section got derailed, I said carefully. I had specific recommendations that didn't get fully communicated. Harrison laughed. "Adrian, you can't overwhelm executives with too much technical detail. They glaze over. You have to speak their language. Keep it strategic and high level." They specifically requested detailed operational analysis. I said, frustration creeping into my voice. That's why I was on this pitch team. And you provided context, Harrison said, which I then positioned strategically. That's how Apex does it. That's why we win. Richard said nothing, just drove. That silence spoke volumes. We lost the pitch. Pinnacle went with a different firm. Richard called a debrief meeting the next week to discuss what went wrong. They felt we didn't demonstrate enough specific understanding of their unique operational challenges, Richard said, reading from the feedback email. They said our pitch was too generic, not enough concrete analysis. Exactly what I'd tried to provide before Harrison talked over me. I waited for Richard to acknowledge this. Instead, he looked at me. Adrian, this is the kind of pitch where your operational expertise should have been the differentiator. What happened? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I presented detailed operational analysis. Harrison kept redirecting to generic strategy concepts. I was enhancing your technical points with strategic framing, Harrison said smoothly. The issue is that your presentation style didn't engage them. Too much data dumping, not enough executive presence. Executive presence, I said. I was trying to answer their actual questions. Elise jumped in. Adrian, I think what Harrison is saying is that you need to develop your communication skills. It's not enough to have good analysis if you can't present it compellingly. That's something you should work on. I looked at Richard, waiting for him to defend me. So to point out that Harrison had hijacked my section, to acknowledge that I'd done exactly what was asked, he just nodded slowly. It's a fair point. Adrian, you're strong on substance, but we need to elevate your presentation skills. This is the level we're operating at now post-merger. The bar is higher. The bar is higher, like I was the problem. Like I hadn't just watched Harrison sabotage a pitch and then blame me for it. I left that meeting furious but also shaken. Was I wrong? Was my style really the issue? Had I misread the situation completely? Over the next month, things got worse. I noticed I was being excluded from high-profile pitches. Richard started assigning me smaller projects, routine work that didn't require client presentations. When I asked about it, he said, I'm giving you time to develop your skills before putting you in front of major clients again. I was being sidelined, quietly pushed to the margins. Then came the quarterly all-hands meeting. The entire firm gathered to review performance, celebrate wins, discuss strategy. These meetings were important for visibility, for showing leadership who was contributing. Douglas Hendricks, the managing partner, presented the quarterly results. Revenue was up. Several major contracts had been won. He highlighted top performers. Harrison and Elise were both recognized for exceptional client engagement and business development excellence. Then Douglas opened the floor for discussion about growth strategy. Several people shared ideas, more thought leadership content, stronger social media presence, now a partnership with a technology firm to offer digital transformation services. I raised my hand. I'd been thinking about this. Summit had always been strong in mid-market companies, but we were now competing for enterprise contracts where we didn't have deep relationships. What if we developed a specialized offering for mid-market clients who were scaling toward enterprise size, a growth strategy practice that helped them prepare for that transition? It played to our strengths, addressed an underserved market segment, and differentiated us from the big firms who only wanted huge enterprises or the small boutiques who couldn't handle complexity. Douglas called on me. I stood up and presented the idea, explained the market opportunity, the competitive advantage, how it aligned with our existing capabilities. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then Harrison spoke up. That's an interesting idea, Adrian, but I think you're missing the bigger picture. We're trying to move up market, not stay in the middle market. That's where the prestige and the margins are. I'm not suggesting we abandon enterprise clients, I said. I'm suggesting we also serve an adjacent market that's highly profitable and underserved. Elise chimed in. It sounds like you're trying to keep us focused on smaller deals because that's your comfort zone, but the firm's strategy is clear. We're going after major accounts. My comfort zone? I felt heat rising in my face. It's not about comfort, it's about strategic positioning and competitive advantage, Douglas interrupted. I appreciate the input, Adrian, but I think Harrison and Elise are right. Our focus is enterprise-level engagements. We need everyone aligned on that vision. He moved on to the next topic. I sat down, my heart pounding. I'd just been dismissed in front of the entire firm. My idea shut down not because it was bad, but because it didn't fit the narrative they wanted. After the meeting, a few colleagues approached me with sympathy. That was rough, one said. Your idea actually made sense, but sympathy didn't change anything. I'd been publicly disrespected by leadership, and everyone had witnessed it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the meeting over and over. The casual dismissal, the implication that I wasn't strategic enough, wasn't thinking big enough, was stuck in my comfort zone. All because I'd proposed something that didn't fit Douglas's vision. The message was clear. Adapt to the new Apex culture or become irrelevant. The next few weeks were miserable. I kept my head down, did my work, avoided drawing attention, but I could feel my confidence eroding. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong at this level. Maybe I was a mid-market consultant trying to play in a league above my abilities. My girlfriend, Jen, noticed I was off. You seem defeated, she said over dinner one night. That's not like you. I think I'm in over my head at Summit, I admitted. The merger changed everything. I don't fit the culture anymore. So leave, she said simply. Find somewhere that values what you bring. It's not that easy. Summit is prestigious. Leaving would look like failure. And what if they're right? What if I'm just not good enough for this level? Jen put down her fork and looked at me directly. Adrian, I've watched you transform struggling companies. I've seen clients specifically request you because they trust your judgment. You are good enough. The question is whether Summit deserves you. Her words hit hard. She was right. I'd been so focused on trying to fit their mold that I'd forgotten my actual track record. I'd delivered real results for real clients. That hadn't changed. What changed was being in an environment that valued style over substance, perception over performance. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked at my work objectively, reviewed my case studies, my client testimonials, my outcomes. The evidence was clear. I was good at what I did, very good. The problem wasn't my competence. It was being in a place that didn't value the kind of competence I had. Now, Monday morning, I made a decision. I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I didn't fit. I was done shrinking myself to match their expectations. If Summit didn't appreciate what I brought, someone else would. I updated my resume, reached out to my network, let people know I was quietly exploring opportunities, not desperately, just strategically. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 inquiries. One from a former client who'd moved to a new company and wanted to bring me on as head of strategy. One from a boutique consulting firm that specialized in mid-market operational improvement. And one from a private equity firm that was looking for someone to work with their portfolio companies on growth strategy. The private equity opportunity was interesting. Garrison Partners. They owned controlling stakes in 12 mid-sized companies across different industries. They needed someone who could go into these companies, identify operational improvements, develop growth strategies, and actually implement them. Not just recommend, but execute. The managing partner, a woman named Claire Yamamoto, was direct. We don't need fancy presentations. We need someone who can roll up their sleeves and make our companies more valuable. From what I've heard, that's your strength. She'd spoken to 2 of my former clients. Both had given me strong recommendations. Both had specifically mentioned that I didn't just deliver reports. I stayed involved until the solutions were actually working. The compensation was comparable to Summit, but the equity component was significant. Yeah, performance-based equity in the fund and in the individual portfolio. Companies I improved. If I did my job well, I could make substantially more than I'd ever make at Summit. More importantly, Claire valued results over presentations, substance over style, the things that actually mattered. I accepted the offer, put in my notice at Summit. Richard was surprised. You're leaving for a private equity firm? Adrian, that's operations work, not strategy. You're better than that. Better than that, like execution wasn't valuable, like actually making companies successful was beneath a real consultant. It's the right move for me, I said. I appreciate the opportunity you gave me at Summit, but I think my skills are better suited elsewhere. He didn't try hard to keep me, just nodded and said he'd support whatever transition was needed. I worked my 2 weeks, handed off my projects professionally, and left. No dramatic exit, no burned bridges. I just walked away from a place that didn't value me. Starting at Garrison Partners was like taking a breath after being underwater. Claire introduced me to the portfolio companies and was clear about expectations. Each company has specific challenges. Your job is to figure out what's holding them back and fix it. You'll have authority to implement changes. No committees, no endless approvals. If you see a problem, solve it. My first assignment was a manufacturing company called Precision Components. They made specialized parts for aerospace and automotive industries. Revenue had been flat for 3 years, despite strong demand in their market. Mark Garrison had acquired them 18 months ago, expecting growth that hadn't materialized. I spent 2 weeks on site, talking to employees, reviewing operations, analyzing data. The problem became clear quickly. They had excellent engineering and production capabilities, but terrible sales processes. No real CRM system, no systematic follow-up on leads. Sales reps were working off spreadsheets and personal relationships. Meanwhile, their best competitor had just invested heavily in a modern sales infrastructure and was taking market share. I developed a plan, implement a proper CRM system, hire a VP of sales with experience in industrial sales, create a structured lead generation and qualification process, invest in digital marketing to reach engineers at potential client companies. Claire approved the budget. I hired the VP of sales, a woman named Patricia, who'd built sales organizations at 2 similar companies. Together, we implemented the changes. Within 6 months, Precision Component sales pipeline had tripled. Within 9 months, revenue was up 28%. Within a year, up 41%. The company went from stagnant to growing rapidly. The success got Claire's attention. What you did at Precision is exactly what we need across the portfolio. Let's talk about your next assignment. Over the next 2 years, I worked with 5 more portfolio companies, a software company that needed to transition from perpetual licenses to subscription revenue, a distribution company with warehouse efficiency problems, a healthcare services company struggling with customer retention. Every situation was different, but the approach was the same. I understand the real problem, develop a practical solution, execute systematically, measure results. And I delivered every time. Not perfect, but consistently strong results. Companies grew, valuations increased, Garrison's returns on those investments exceeded their projections. My compensation reflected that success. Between salary, bonuses, and equity stakes, I was making more than I ever had at Summit. More importantly, I was building real wealth through the equity appreciation. Claire promoted me to principal. I started having input on which companies Garrison acquired, focusing on situations where operational improvements could drive significant value creation. Then something interesting happened. One of the companies I'd helped, the software company, got acquired by a larger firm for 3 times what Garrison had paid. My equity stake in that exit was substantial, life-changing money. But more than the money, the acquisition got attention in the private equity community. Other firms started calling, asking if I'd consult for their portfolio companies. Claire encouraged it. Build your reputation, it's good for you and it's good for Garrison. I started taking selective consulting engagements with other PE firms' portfolio companies. Always operational improvement, always hands-on implementation, always results focused. My network grew. My reputation grew. I wasn't famous, but in the private equity and mid-market business community, people knew my name. They knew I delivered. Then I got a call from Michael Reeves, the VP of Operations at Pinnacle Industries. The pitch summit had lost 2 years earlier. Adrian, I'm not sure you remember me, he said. I remember. Supply chain restructuring pitch. We lost. Right, well, that worked out badly. The firm we hired talked a good game but delivered almost nothing. Lots of reports, no real improvements. We eventually fired them and brought the work in-house, but we're still struggling. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, wondering where this was going. I called Summit looking for you, Michael continued. Wanted to see if you might be available to help us directly. They said you'd left. Took me a while to track you down through your network. What are you looking for? I asked. Remember that analysis you started presenting in the pitch meeting? The specific bottlenecks in our supply chain? That was the only part of the whole pitch that felt real, like someone actually understood our problems. Then your colleague talked over you and redirected to vague strategy nonsense. I smiled despite myself. I remember. Would you be willing to take a look at our situation now? Not as part of Summit, just you directly. I can't promise it's a fit, but I'd value your assessment. I agreed to meet with him, reviewed their current situation. The problems I'd identified 2 years ago had gotten worse. The other consulting firm had recommended broad organizational restructuring without addressing the specific operational inefficiencies. I put together a proposal, focused, concrete, implementable, exactly what I'd wanted to present in that original pitch. Before Harrison derailed it, Michael loved it. Pinnacle engaged me for a 6-month project. I brought in Patricia, the VP of sales I'd hired at Precision Components. Chow, who'd since left to start her own operations consulting practice. Together we tackled Pinnacle's supply chain problems. We delivered. Within 6 months, distribution efficiency improved 31%. Costs dropped 22%. On-time delivery went from 74% to 96%. Michael was thrilled. He wrote me a testimonial that I still use. Adrian delivered more value in 6 months than the previous consulting firm delivered in 18 months. He doesn't just identify problems, he fixes them. The Pinnacle success became a case study I used in other business development. It led to more engagements, bigger projects, better clients. 2.5 years after leaving Summit, now I was running my own boutique consulting practice, focused on operational improvements for mid-market companies and private equity portfolio companies. I had 3 full-time employees and a network of specialists I brought in for specific projects. Revenue was strong, reputation was excellent. I was building something valuable and sustainable. Then I got an unexpected email from Richard Thornton, my former boss at Summit. Adrian, I hope this message finds you well. I've been hearing your name frequently in my network recently. Impressive what you've built. I'd like to meet for coffee if you're open to it. There's something I'd like to discuss. I was curious enough to agree. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Richard looked older, more tired than I remembered. I'll get to the point, he said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Summit is struggling. The merger with Apex hasn't worked out the way we'd hoped. We focused too much on landing big-name clients and lost our core competency in delivering real operational value. Client satisfaction is down, renewal rates are down, several partners have left. I listened without comment. Douglas is out, Richard continued. The board pushed him out 6 months ago. I'm interim managing partner trying to stabilize things. We need to get back to what made Summit successful in the first place. Substance over style. Real results over impressive presentations. That's a significant shift, I said neutrally. It is, and it requires bringing in people who actually know how to deliver that kind of value. He paused. I want you to come back, Adrian, as a partner. Lead our operational excellence practice. Now help us rebuild our reputation for actually improving companies instead of just producing reports. Partner at Summit. The goal I'd once worked toward but never achieved, now being offered to me. What about Harrison and Elise? I asked. Harrison left for another firm 8 months ago. Elise is still there but in a reduced role. The Apex approach hasn't worked. We're returning to our roots. I appreciated the honesty, but I already knew my answer. Richard, I'm flattered by the offer, truly. But I'm not interested in coming back. He looked surprised. Can I ask why? We'd give you significant autonomy, strong compensation, equity partnership stake. Because I don't need Summit anymore, I said, not unkindly. I've built something that's working. I have clients who value what I do. I have autonomy to work the way I think is best. Well, why would I give that up to fix someone else's problems? Richard nodded slowly. Because Summit gave you your start. Because we have infrastructure and resources you don't have on your own. Because being a partner at an established firm is more prestigious than running a small boutique practice. Prestigious to who? I asked. I'm not interested in prestige. I'm interested in doing good work and being valued for it. I have that now. I didn't have it at Summit. Fair enough, Richard said. But at least consider consulting for us, not as an employee, but as an external advisor. Help us rebuild the operational practice. We'll pay your rates, respect your independence. I'll think about it, I said, though I already knew I wouldn't take that either. We finished our coffee and parted ways. I felt no triumph and no satisfaction in turning him down, just clarity. Summit had been part of my journey, but it wasn't my destination. A few weeks later, I got another call, this one from Douglas Hendricks, the former managing partner who dismissed my idea in that all-hands meeting. Adrian, I was hoping we could talk, he said. About what? I asked, curious despite myself. I'm starting a new consulting firm, focused on mid-market operational improvement. After my experience at Summit, I've realized that's where the real value creation happens. I'm assembling a team of the best operational consultants I know. I want you as a founding partner. The irony was almost funny. The man who'd publicly shut down my suggestion to focus on mid-market was now trying to recruit me to do exactly that. Douglas, when I proposed a mid-market growth practice at Summit, you dismissed it. Said we needed to focus on enterprise clients. What changed? There was a long pause. I was wrong. The Apex playbook of chasing prestige clients and big contracts doesn't actually build a sustainable consulting business. I learned that the hard way. You were right. I appreciate you saying that, I said, but I'm not interested in joining your new firm. Can I ask why? Because 3 years ago, when I worked for you, you made it clear my approach wasn't valued. You dismissed my ideas publicly. You let your people undermine me. Now that my approach has proven successful, you want me to help build your business on it. That's not partnership, that's opportunism. That's fair, Douglas said quietly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you then. I appreciate the apology, I said, but it doesn't change my answer. After we hung up, I sat for a while thinking about the conversation. 3 years ago, hearing Douglas apologize and admit I'd been right would have felt like vindication. Now it just felt irrelevant. I'd moved past needing their validation. I'd proven myself to the only people who mattered, my clients, my team, myself. The real revenge wasn't getting an apology or turning down their offers. The real revenge was building something successful enough that they had to come to me, that they recognized too late that they'd made a mistake. My consulting practice continued to grow. I stayed focused on mid-market companies and private equity portfolio companies, the work I was best at, the work that created real value. I brought on 2 more partners, both experienced operators who shared my philosophy. Substance over style, results over presentations, implementation over theory. We built a reputation as the firm you called when you actually wanted to improve your business, not just get an impressive report to show your board. 4 years after that humiliating all-hands meeting at Summit, I was invited to speak at a private equity conference about operational value creation. The audience was managing partners from PE firms, investment professionals, operating partners, the people who controlled billions in capital in hundreds of companies. I presented case studies from my work, specific problems, specific solutions, specific results. No consulting jargon, no theoretical frameworks, just practical demonstrations of how focused operational improvements created measurable value. After my presentation during the networking session, several people approached me for my card. One of them was Sandra Park, the CFO from Pinnacle Industries, who'd been in that failed pitch meeting years ago. I didn't realize you were the same Adrian Cole from that Summit pitch, she said. Michael's told me many times he wished we'd hired you back then instead of the firm we chose. It worked out okay, I said. I got to work with you eventually. Better than okay, she said. You delivered more value than any consultant we'd worked with. And from what I've heard, you've done that repeatedly with other companies. Later that evening, back in my hotel room, I reflected on the journey. From being dismissed and disrespected at Summit, to building something valuable and respected in the market. The revenge I'd gotten wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation where I told off Douglas or Richard, no public exposure of how badly Summit had mismanaged the Apex merger, no sabotage of their business. The revenge was quieter and more complete. I'd proven that my approach worked. That substance mattered more than style, that delivering real results built a more sustainable business than chasing prestige. Summit had to come to me, hat in hand, asking me to save them. Douglas had to admit he'd been wrong and try to recruit me. I got to turn them both down from a position of strength. They had to eat their words, not because I forced them to, but because reality made it inevitable. That's the most satisfying revenge. Not destruction, but validation, and not proving them wrong out of spite, but proving yourself right through success. 5 years after leaving Summit, my firm had grown to 15 consultants, annual revenue of $8 million, and a client roster of 40 companies. We'd helped those companies create over $200 million in enterprise value. Through operational improvements, I'd built financial security for myself and for my team. More importantly, I'd built something I was proud of. A business based on delivering real value, treating people with respect, and proving that substance ultimately wins over style. I married Jen, the girlfriend who told me Summit didn't deserve me. She'd been right. We bought a house, started a family. I still worked hard, but I had balance. Time for the things that mattered beyond work. Now, occasionally I'd see former Summit colleagues at conferences or events. Some had left like me and were thriving. Others had stayed and seemed worn down by the ongoing struggles to rebuild the firm's reputation. Harrison reached out once asking if I had any openings at my firm. I told him honestly that we weren't hiring at his level. He'd moved between 3 firms in 5 years, never quite finding his footing after Summit's decline. The slick presentation style that had worked in the short term hadn't built a sustainable career. I didn't feel satisfaction in his struggles, just recognition that the skills he'd valued, the ability to talk over substance with style, those weren't actually valuable in the long run. The lesson I took from the whole experience wasn't about revenge or proving people wrong. It was about knowing your worth even when others don't see it. About having the courage to leave situations that diminish you. About building something aligned with your actual strengths instead of trying to fit someone else's mold. Getting disrespected in that meeting felt devastating at the time. It shook my confidence and made me question my abilities. But it also forced me to recognize that I was in the wrong environment, that the culture at Summit post-merger wasn't going to value what I brought. Leaving was scary. Starting over was hard. But it was the best decision I ever made, because on the other side of that disrespect and dismissal was the freedom to build something true to who I actually was. A consulting practice based on operational excellence and real results. A business that attracted clients who valued substance. A team that shared my philosophy. I made them eat their words not through confrontation or sabotage, but through success. By building something better than what they had. By proving that my approach, the one they'd dismissed, actually worked in the real world. That's the revenge worth having. Not destruction of those who wronged you, but construction of something they can't ignore. Not proving them wrong, but proving yourself right. 5 years later, the sting of that meeting had faded. The memory remained, but without the emotional charge. It had become just another part of my story. The low point that preceded growth. The rejection that led to better opportunities. I'd made them eat their words by building a success too obvious to dismiss, by becoming someone they needed more than I needed them, or by walking away from their offers from a position of strength rather than desperation. That's the most complete revenge. Not anger or bitterness, but peace. Not proving them wrong, but no longer needing to. They laughed at me in that conference room. They dismissed my ideas and questioned my abilities. They made me doubt myself. But 5 years later, they weren't laughing. They were calling, asking, offering, recognizing too late that they'd made a mistake. And I got to smile, thank them politely, and walk away, because I didn't need their validation anymore. I had built my own. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.